Eylon Levy is a former spokesperson for the Israeli Prime Minister. Good evening to you, Eylon.
Hello, good evening, Kate.
It is thought, or certainly being reported, that Israel may not be able to swallow any ceasefire deal that doesn't see the release of all hostages, all 50 hostages. Is that what you understand to be the case? Could that be a sticking point here, or is there finally a bit of room for manoeuvre?
That has been Israel's demand since those poor hostages were snatched from their beds nearly 2 years ago. Hamas must release them all immediately and unconditionally. There is no excuse to hold them any longer. And when we speak of a deal, we're legitimizing human trafficking. I mean, they were abducted from their beds, they're being held for a ransom, and Israel is being extorted. And I think it's way past time that Hamas has accepted that ceasefire deal. But let's remember, they rejected weeks ago when they saw international pressure growing on Israel and rejected that ceasefire. But look, here's Netanyahu's dilemma, okay? Netanyahu doesn't want a ceasefire that pauses the war. He wants to end the war. He wants to end the war with all the hostages home and with Hamas disarmed and removed from power so it can never launch a destructive war like this again. And way too late, the whole world is demanding the same from Hamas. So I think there's a fear that if Israel accepts a temporary ceasefire to get half the hostages out, that dooms the rest of the hostages, because Hamas is going to use them as leverage to try to survive this war and get guarantees that it can remain in power. And now that Israel is drawing up plans to conquer Gaza City, evacuate the population for their own safety, and go in, Netanyahu is wondering whether to press Israel's military advantage to tell Hamas it's game over. Even the Arab world is pressuring you to give up. You just have to free all the hostages, relinquish power, and end this war once and for all.
Yeah, look, meanwhile, there is plenty of international pressure on Israel because of the lives being lost at the moment in Gaza. And you will say, well, Israel has no other choice there because it is trying to remove Hamas by their own methods, sort of before any kind of peace deal or ceasefire is negotiated at all. But this is a tricky situation for Israel to be in. And there are some, Eylon Levy, who say actually there are parts of the Israeli Prime Minister's coalition that prefer the war to continue on an indefinite basis, that nothing is acceptable other than a complete takeover of Gaza, that Gaza become Israeli territory. That is what certainly some of the harder right-leaning members of the Israeli Prime Minister's coalition cabinet are after. And so that then puts the Israeli Prime Minister in a difficult position, trying to keep everyone happy.
Absolutely. There are political balls that need to be juggled. There are parts of Netanyahu's coalition who want this war to end with Gaza under full Israeli control and to resume Jewish settlements in Gaza. But that's not the Prime Minister's plan. The Prime Minister has said that Israel's goal is to finish this war quickly by driving Hamas out of power and then handing the Gaza Strip over to some international authority with Palestinian leadership that is not committed to the destruction of the state of Israel, like Hamas. Israel does not want to, at least Netanyahu, does not want to govern Gaza. He wants to hand it over to, I guess, what you would call some sort of international trusteeship system.
Yeah, he's talked about the Arab nations getting involved. I suppose
exactly.
The question there is what does meaning driving Hamas out of power? How does that look in reality? Is that actually a suitable ambition, driving Hamas out of power? Surely there will always be elements, whether they belong to Hamas or that this whole conflict has provoked other swathes of disillusioned people in that territory or beyond to try and rise up against Israel. Surely the most important thing here is to get the territory to a point where it can be governed by a coalition of nations, Arab or not, however that is done. This all-out eradication of Hamas, surely that is a sort of fantasy-like ambition, isn't it?
Well, I mean, the only path to peace is if Hamas is removed from power and its military capabilities are dismantled. No one thinks that this war is going to end terrorism once and for all, just as the international coalition that took down ISIS and caused massive destruction to the cities of Mosul and Raqqa didn't end ISIS, which remained a terrorist organization, but it did end the ISIS regime. And it meant that ISIS no longer had a territorial foothold from which to wage war. And so what Israel wants here is not to defeat Islamist terrorism once and for all. That's a global problem. But to make sure that a jihadi terrorist organization does not control territory that is just a few hundred meters away from Israelis' homes, with an ability to try to surprise us again, march into people's bedrooms and take hostages like they did on October 7th. And I think Netanyahu says that while there are calls for perhaps other countries' forces to take over control of the Gaza Strip, no one is going to do that if Hamas still has thousands of armed terrorists who are going to resist them. I saw a report today in the Israeli media, I don't know if it's true, that Egypt is now pressuring Hamas to surrender its weapons to Egypt to be kept for safekeeping for a period of a ceasefire. That's the sort of pressure we needed on Hamas all along. And if the world had been placing those demands on Hamas, that we're hearing now, that it must release the hostages, that it must relinquish power, that it must disarm, if the world had come around to accepting Israel's war goals when Hamas started this war nearly 2 years ago, we would be in a very different position right now.
What is your thought? Do we know if Israel will come back with a counter offer to this ceasefire proposal? We know it's been agreed by Hamas. It's almost identical to the US Special Envoy's ceasefire deal. That's what Qatar has said today. Will Israel counter? Will Israel agree to this?
I think the question we should be asking is what pressure the world can put on Hamas and its sponsors to make it end the war once and for all.
Hamas have already agreed to this. I suppose the question is, will Israel play their part?
Temporary ceasefire. Hamas has agreed to a 60-day pause in the war in exchange for releasing half of the hostages it is starving and torturing and abusing in those dungeons. And the demand should not be, well, let Hamas let half of them out and then it gets to keep half of them while it negotiates.
So Israel won't agree to this ceasefire deal?
Okay. I'm saying Netanyahu has a dilemma, and the hostage families are torn as well. You know, we had massive protests in Israel at the beginning of the week demanding a comprehensive deal that will end the war and bring everyone home in one go. But now that there's a proposal on the table to bring back half the hostages, some of the hostage families are saying, well, take that, at least rescue half of them. So there are impossible dilemmas to navigate now. And the real question is, how do we get Hamas to relinquish power and allow this war to end and not just be put on the back burner?
Look, I suppose the idea is step by step on this one. We're due to hear, we understand, from Israel by Friday at the latest. Eylon Levy, former spokesperson for the Israeli Prime Minister, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.